inside of the museum and where our school programs fit into pollinators and science and engineering processes. But don't want to keep you. I'll send you on over to Leah and enjoy the journey.
Okay, hi folks. As Michael said, my name is Leah. I am the curator here at the Wild Center. Generally what that means is I help take care of our ambassador animal collection. We have about 300 native New York animals that call the Wild Center home, everything from river otters to fish to snakes to owls and all that kind of stuff. And now I'm going to take you on a little bit of a field trip around our campus to talk about some of the interesting features about our campus and how pollinators fit into the work we do here and the education programs we do. So the site we're standing on right now is a former rock quarry. It was an abandoned rock quarry that was really not very productive biologically for animals. So when the Wild Center came into being, the idea came into being, they were looking for a site. This site was really perfect as a way to sort of reclaim an old used area and rewild it, if you will. So we have planted a lot of native plants that would be found right here in the Adirondacks, but also a lot of the stuff has come in on animals themselves and a lot of the pollinators. A lot of our plants that are growing around our pond right now were brought in by bird species, believe it or not. So a lot of the stuff we didn't even plant. So we're going to talk about, we're going to stop over here for a second. The Wild Center has been partnering with several Native American partners for a few years now in a project called Ways of Knowing. We are working with them to talk about traditional ecological knowledge. Western science has one way of looking at nature, and traditional knowledge comes from people who have lived on the land for thousands of years and know the rhythms and all of that sort of stuff. So this garden right here is called a Three Sisters garden. It's corn, beans, and squash. And it talks about how those three plants, when they're planted together, are a really symbiotic relationship. Those plants work well together to grow. Some of the plants put nitrogen in the soil, which some of the other plants need, and it just talks about that project. It also needs pollinators to pollinate it. So in a little while, we're still early in our growing season, this will be full of plants. We're gonna walk further. I don't know if you can tell I'm wearing a very stylish suit right now because we are gonna be visiting one of our beehives outside, but along the way, we're gonna take you to some of our pollinator gardens. So we're gonna head over this lovely little bridge right here. And if you have questions, please feel free to share them. I will do my best to answer them while we're touring around. So we have several spots on campus where we planted pollinator gardens very specifically. And this right here, actually, I'm gonna come over here a little further. This is one example of that. Over here, we have plants like bee balm, we have cardinal flower, and we've planted a couple types of milkweed all right behind me. So again, we're early in our growing season, but those plants are all here. And as they start to emerge, it's just a riot of butterflies, bees, and flies, which you'll often find me out here trying to ID all of the insects that come to these areas. And then we're going to head a little further down our trail. And I'd love to show you our Monarch way station. Now, monarchs are one of our most popular animals to talk about. Our visitors really love those butterflies, and they're a really good on-ramp to sort of get people thinking about conservation and what they can do in their own yards and in their own places. Because a lot of our visitors aren't from Tupper Lake, they're not from the Adirondacks, they're from all over. So we try to use a lot of what we have here as an example, and this is one great space for this. So this is through Project Monarch Watch, which you're going to hear more about in a little bit. But again, this right here, we have a couple different species of milkweed growing here. We have bee balm and some other species that I'm forgetting right now. Well, what the monarchs really need are two things. They need food for their young, and they need nectar as adults. So that's what this encompasses. And it's one of the places we can take our visitors and our school groups or whoever comes here and talk about way stations. And what that means is we can plant these small gardens, even if you have a small yard, even if you live in an urban environment and you just have a little firescape space, you can actually become a way station. You can plant some of these plants and you can help the monarchs on their journey when they're migrating north or south. It's really important for them to have these little way stations. As we know, habitat for them is really critical and they're losing habitat all over the place. So having these little way stations really helps them and helps their populations thrive. One of the other things we do as part of sort of an overall monarch project is we actually tag monarchs every summer. And we do that with students, we do it with visitors. We have special little tiny stickers that have unique ID codes on them. And at the end of the summer, the very last population of the summer will go from Tupper Lake all the way to Mexico where they overwinter. So if we put these little IDs on them and they make it to Mexico, the researchers down there, if they find the tag, they can look the number up and find exactly those butterflies helping with conservation. So the next step, I think, oh yeah, do we have any questions? Well, I'm talking your ear off.
No questions yet. But if anyone wants to unmute and ask, please feel free.
I like it. I'm answering all their questions already.
You're doing great.
So the next step I think we should take, we're gonna sort of walk around the trail this way, and we're gonna head over to our honeybee hives. We've had honeybee hives for 5 years now at the Wild Center. I got talked into it sort of surreptitiously. In the beginning, I was a little skeptical. Just like most people, I was a little nervous to be around bees. But what I have found in working with them is they're very gentle creatures. And we're going to see that in just a moment. Honeybees typically don't want to sting. They're very busy. They all have jobs. And when they do sting, they actually pass away. So they try not to sting, and they will get to know their beekeepers. They get to know your smell and the sight of your face, and they become very docile. So yeah, this is actually a great spot to talk about habitat management. So we have several different habitats here at the Wild Center. What we're standing in right now, we call our meadow. We actually do a little bit of mowing in here because we want this to stay grasses and flowers versus letting it succeed to bushes and trees. So we actively manage this. It's right next to the pond. It's also by a tree line. So in terms of honeybees, this is actually the perfect spot to put beehives. The tree line helps provide shelter, especially in the winter. It blocks some of the wind. Honeybees do need water. They need to be near a water source to drink. And they're located in a meadow where we have tons of flowers that grow. So they pretty much have everything they need here. And then, of course, all of the other pollinators benefit from this meadow as well. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put my bee suit all the way up. I do have a little bit of a reaction to bee stings, although you usually don't ever try to sting me, but I'm going to be a little careful. Also, I just really like the suit. And we will pop open one of the hives. Hopefully we won't get Jeremiah stung, but he's being very brave. And we'll look at some bees. So, those of you who don't have a lot of experience with honeybees, a hive consists mostly of females. There's one queen who will lay all the eggs that are needed to populate the hive. The workers are all females, and occasionally there will be male bees called drones, and their only job is to mate with a new queen should a hive produce a brand new queen. So what we're looking at right now is called hive box. This is traditional style beehive. Candle. So they make that honeycomb, and that is where they store pollen, they store nectar, which will turn into honey, and it's also where the queen will lay her eggs and the young get raised. So what I'm doing right now is they use a special kind of wax called propolis to seal up their hives. They don't want any cracks or air, of course, to keep their hives nice and secure. So I have to sort of pry it open a little bit. So I'm going to try to pull out one of these frames gently and show you. This is a nice heavy frame. So hopefully you can tell from where you are, there's some kind of shiny stuff down in the honeycomb. That is nectar. The bees will take the nectar from the flowers, they mix it with their saliva, which has some enzymes in it. They put it into the honeycomb, and then they'll dehydrate it until it becomes the consistency of honey. And eventually, once it's mature honey, they cap it over with a very special wax that seals that honey and makes it waterproof and airtight, and it can stay indefinitely. They eat honey and pollen, both of those. Honey is their carbohydrate source, and pollen is their protein. So in any given hive like this, there can be 20 to 60,000 bees and one queen. There is a queen in here somewhere, and she is marked, but I don't always see her. I'll just pull a couple out really quick and see if I can find her. Or if I can show you some baby bees. There's a ton of the yellow in the honeycomb there, that is pollen they've collected. Some of the bees have little yellow dots on their back legs. That is pollen that they carry in what's called their pollen baskets. It's like their pockets. They carry pollen in there back to the hive. And I don't see the queen yet, but we're getting closer. Again, any questions? I could talk about this all day, so I want to stop and make sure if anybody has any questions, I answer them. Nope, none in there. Nope. But we do have, some baby bees. So these right here are bees that are starting to mature. Inside some of that honeycomb, you'll see what looks like a white worm. These are all female. They will become female workers. Over here, there's some capped honeycomb that looks a little taller. It almost looks like a pencil eraser. Those will become drone bees. Those will be male bees. The males are bigger, so they end up being a little bigger when they're growing. Let's see. Oh, we got a lot of drone going on in here. So that's interesting. And they have some mature honey right here. This is honey that they mix with their saliva and they dehydrate it, and it's capped over, and they'll keep it that way until they need to eat it. And I don't know that I will see the queen, but here's some more drones, or workers, female workers. Those will be all females.
Leah, Andrea wants to know, how would we get started if we wanted to have hives?
That's a great question. So I think there's a couple things to do. If you have a local supplier that sells bee stuff around you, it's really good to go in person and see stuff. Or if you know of a local beekeeper or beekeeping association. Most of beekeeping is learned by doing, and if you can have a mentor, it's really important. I'm fortunate that there was a beekeeper right down the road who taught me a lot of stuff. And there is a store called Better Bee about 2 hours from here that I spent an entire day at in the first place. So, going out in the field with somebody and seeing their hives and seeing what it's all about is, I think, the first step. And then it's a matter of buying supplies, buying a hive like this. So the hives consist of, like I said, there's a box. As they fill this box, I'll put another one on top. As they start to, the queen lays more eggs and there's more bees in here. And then as they really start to produce a lot of honey, I'll put a special honey box on top. So you have to buy all of that equipment. I'm using a smoker. And I have a couple extra hives here. I have something, a special hive, which I haven't really used that much. This is a totally different, it's called a flow hive. And it's supposed to be easier to harvest honey. I don't know if I can get one of these out of here right now. I found that the bees didn't like it so much here yet, but I'm going to try it again. So this is just a different style of frame. The honeycomb is already there. The bees don't need to produce it. And basically you can sort of insert a key into this hive. It opens the honeycomb and drains the honey right out of the hive itself. Otherwise, you need equipment, special equipment, just to get the honey out of the frames. So really, after that, it's more about buying equipment. It's a couple $100s to get started, to get you know, a hive going. And then you order bees, which is usually late spring. You can mail order them. These bees came right from UPS. They were shipped UPS to us right here to the Wild Center. So you can order them to your site. And that's sort of it. There is a Beekeeping for Dummies book. Of course there is. And I think that is a really good resource, just a basic how to get started.
Dina wants to know, do you need a special permit to keep bees on your property?
We do not. I can't speak for every state, but as far as I know in New York, you don't, unless maybe you live in a homeowners association, and sometimes urban environments, you know, there might be some rules there, but here we don't, pretty much.
And Teresa, note that if people are looking, if you don't know of a beekeeper down the road from you, or you'd like to get connected, that the beekeepers associations are usually pretty active and very open to having new beekeepers join their group and teaching others. Usually a pretty friendly group. Would you agree?
Yes, that has totally been my experience. I'm in Franklin County here in New York, and right next door to us is St. Lawrence County, and there is a whole beekeeping club, which I joined right away when I first got these hives. And I learned from all of the experts there, folks that have been beekeeping for, you know, decades, which was extremely helpful. And I would agree. Beekeepers tend to be the kind of people who just want you to come and see their bees. I think we all tend to fall in love with our girls. That's what we say. I have yet to help a classroom install a beehive, but that is a goal of mine, is to you know, work with one of our local school groups and install a hive and help kids maintain the hive. I think, you know, there's infinite learning possibilities there. Honeybees are extremely social. They communicate through chemical signaling called pheromones, and they have different jobs throughout their entire lives. So when they first hatch as adults, they often end up taking care of the next generation of young. They'll help polish the honeycomb and keep it clean and make new comb. They can become undertakers, so they'll get rid of dead bees. And it isn't until the end of their life, which in the middle of summer is just a few weeks, that they are flying workers, and they'll go out and gather pollen and nectar. But they're just fascinating how social they are, and they communicate with each other, and they work synergistically. I think we have a lot to learn from honeybees, honestly, and how we communicate and work together. So right here, right just steps from their hive is really their food source. They can range about 3 miles from any given hive. I think that our honeybees probably don't have to go super far, because this field is all native plants, and we didn't actually plant this intentionally. It's just what naturally grows here. So right now we have wild strawberry flowering. A lot of the trees are flowering right now, so that's what they're gathering. In the end of the summer, this is all oh my gosh, the word just fell out of my head. Goldenrod, thank you, Jeremiah. This is all goldenrod, and we were talking earlier before the program started. Towards the end of August, when the goldenrod is flowering, there are hundreds of species of pollinators in here. Everything from solitary bees, mason bees, our honeybees, to flies, butterflies, and I try to drag everybody out into this meadow that time of year because it's just amazing. And they're so sort of enamored with the goldenrod, they don't care about us at all. I've never gotten stung. I walk right out here just in my, shorts and my work shirt. It's amazing. So again, if you want to create some pollinator habitat in your own space, having sort of a mix of flowers, trees, a little bit of open areas, woods, and water is pretty important for any of the pollinators we're talking about. Insects, birds. We don't have any pollinating bats here, but it would be important for them too. If you do choose to come visit us here on site sometime, we can work with you to, tailor education programs to your specific interests. I am always excited to talk to people about insects. I'm a little bit of an insect nerd, so happy to do that.
About how much honey, Leah, do you produce from your hives here?
That is a great question. So the Adirondacks, our growing season is fairly short. Our winters are long, and our flowering plants don't flower until starting now, really. So it really depends on what kind of summer we have. If we have a rainy summer, the bees tend to not be able to make enough honey to survive. They need about 50 pounds of honey to overwinter. So if they produce an excess of 50 pounds of honey, we will harvest it. The last harvest I did, we got about 30 pounds of honey. So they produced about 80 pounds of honey. I left them with 50 and we collected 30. If they don't produce enough honey, then I supplement their food in the fall so they have enough. But a really productive hive, some people report getting 50 pounds of honey harvested. It kind of depends. The winters are tough up here on bees.
And do you have a pretty good success rate with your bees surviving winter? I know some people who say they live in colder climates, they have a tough time with bees coming back in the winter.
Yep, and I hear that. And I hear that quite a bit from beekeepers in the area. I've been about half and half. So I've been doing this about 5 years. I think I've had 3 years of overwintering and 2 that did. And the 2 that did last year, as we were going into winter, I knew that both of the hives outside we had produced enough honey. And one of the hives, the queen, just appeared to be not very robust. So neither one of those hives made it through. And then there was another winter that the summer before it had been very rainy, and it was a long wet spring, and it just, even with supplementing the food, they just didn't do well. 2 of the things that I have found are the biggest issues are not enough food and moisture in the hive. It's not really the cold. It tends to be if you get a lot of moisture. The queen will cluster with several hundred worker bees that overwinter, and they stay at about 94 degrees all winter long. But if you get moisture condensation in the hive, which you do because there's all that heat from the bees, if it drips down into the cluster of bees, it will kill them. And there's lots of things you can do. You can put styrofoam in the lid of your hive. You can put insulation around your hive. You can do all kinds of things to work with that. It's really about them having enough food and being healthy enough going into the winter, not getting wet. There are several diseases that people deal with. We haven't really had any disease outbreaks. There's something called varroa mites that pretty much everybody has. If they get too high of a level in the hives, they will kill the bees. They drink their circulatory fluid and they'll weaken the bees, and then the hive doesn't make it. But we haven't had high rates of varroa mite infestation yet, thankfully. And we haven't had anything else.
Are there any final questions for Leah before we transition to Michael?
Yep.
Jill asks, what about feeding them sugar water? My husband will give his bees sugar water.
Yep, I definitely do that. The 2 hives outside that we just visited don't have any sugar water feeders on them now. They were getting it up until last week, but now that there's enough flowers open, I haven't been supplementing. But we do have a hive inside that we might take a look at. That is an exhibit hive that does have a sugar water feeder on it. So that hive it's a small hive because it's an exhibit, and they typically don't produce enough honey for their needs just because it's small. So I always keep a little bit of sugar water on it.
And Sarah wants to know, was your fence electrified?
Yes. Oh, sorry. Thank you for reminding me. We have an electric fence around our hive. We do have black bear on the property from time to time. And the New York State DEC has asked us to be very careful with our bird feeders and our beehives. They don't want us creating nuisance bears that are used to coming around to get food. But it's not a bad idea. There are a lot of animals that will go after honeybee hives, skunks, raccoons, bears. And it's not just the honey they're going after, they actually are also eating the larvae, because those larvae are fatty and have a lot of protein. So they're going after it for both of those. And it certainly can be devastating when you and your bees have worked hard to gather honey and somebody comes in and takes it all.
Well, Leah, we cannot thank you enough for taking us on a tour of your hive.
My pleasure.
And I'm sure any additional questions that our teachers have, we can be sure to share your email if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm happy to answer all your bee.
Well, thank you. And with that, we are going to change over to Michael, who welcomed us this afternoon, and he is going to share some resources with you.
Welcome back, everybody. So we are inside the Wild Center in our Naturals cabinet, where it's really a throwback to natural history museums with rocks and specimens and taxidermy and all the microscopes and such. Basically a curiosity cabinet, as we've tried to take the dioramas of old and flip it on its head. And on that note, I wanted to dig in a little bit with our school programs. So Leah mentioned being up for sharing our resources and collaborating in any way people wanted to, and I am 100% behind that. My background is geology, so I don't necessarily always think of pollinators first with our programming, but I did want to showcase a couple things that do touch upon Adirondack pollinators. So last summer we had a junior naturalist program that's free and still on our website that had a page on pollinators. And I know that Leah mentioned that we don't have any local bats, but this was a program made for anybody anywhere that they wanted to find it. You could download the pages and do all the fun activities. We also have Lunchtime Live, which is on Facebook. We do it daily, most of the time at lunchtime, but we have become a little bit flexible with that over the last year or so. So every day from about, I think, March 22nd or so, 2020 through now, we've published something on Facebook as part of Lunchtime Live. This Wednesday, I'm taking the lead on that, and we'll be doing a mindful moment on our observation hive right in front of me. So if you want to tune in Wednesday around noon, there'll be some live footage of our observation hive. And then Get Outside with iNaturalist was one of our early digital programs, connecting students to and teachers to iNaturalist and being able to observe organisms around them, pollinators and otherwise. Both ends of the spectrum with that, with looking at pollinators and the plants that they may be pollinating. I threw a little X on here just so you could see where the virtual field trip took you all. So we started in the outdoor classroom. If you can see my cursor, wandered along the trail on the side of the meadow where we've got our Monarch way station, went over to the beehives, which are under this pole. We have an invitation for osprey to nest they've never actually taken us up on it, but there's a man-made nest at the top there, hoping that osprey will come and utilize it. But the bees have a really nice spot there right on the edge of the forest and meadow. And let's see if I can get it to progress. There we go. Oh, so with our school programs, I've really worked with teachers and BOCES to try to fit the needs of you all, and am always up for collaborating. I've been meaning to get something into the insect or pollinator realm for a while now. And if you approach me, which I'll throw my email in the chat and it's on the last slide, I'm more than happy to try to connect with some of the wonderful resources that New York State Ag in the Classroom are doing, and try to fit in a way to connect with your students, whether it's digital or on site. And within all of these are some of our exhibits with our Science on a Sphere, looking at global systems. Here's an image of one of our virtual field trips with an owl, getting kids to look up close at owl skulls and think about owls like Helios over here. And then over here is pre-pandemic, one of our on-site virtual, or everything's virtual now, but on-site field trips, digging into Adirondack mammals. And all the programs that I've created really focus on those science and engineering skills and practices of the next generation science standards. So instead of picking up something and saying, this is a mammal or this is an owl, we have students brainstorm things that they notice about that to try to access their prior knowledge, and then they apply it through stations or different activities that we pull up digitally now in our virtual field trips. Really trying to get that learning to be student-centered as much as possible, whether it's hands-on and on-site, or more looking at inquiry and questions as we move to a digital world with our field trips currently. Hopefully this will play for you. Something that I found really, I know it's, as much as I do enjoy virtual field trips, it's not the same as being in person and being with the animals. But we try as much as possible to take our phone or our iPad and get it as close to the animals as possible without stressing them out, and allowing kids to get a really good view of, in the case of the top image here, our otters swimming around, getting an otter eye view in Otter Falls, or videos of Cora here, our resident raven. This one was taken in the winter. And what's really cool is we can have these videos and embed them into our digital programs in ways that students can see the animals doing natural behaviors without stressing them out by having a whole classroom huddled around Cora in this case. At the top, we've got another image of that owl virtual field trip where we're comparing and contrasting skulls. And then it's another thing that we do within our apex predators virtual field trip with a coyote and a wolf skull down the bottom image here. Oregon State University has done a really good job, and I'm sure many other institutions around the nation and around the globe have done a great job of scanning some of their objects so that you can manipulate them in real time online. And that's one thing that we've done within our apex predator field trip. Other images of our field trips here, but they are really just looking at trying to access different components of the website and taking different components of our campus and making them accessible for visitors, whether they're here on site or, in the case of digital, anywhere that you're able to join in, making them accessible. So here's some of our contact information. You can connect with me at schoolprograms@wildcenter.org. I'll put that in the chat so you can have it, and send any questions to me or to Leah. And then our website has so many digital resources, whether you go to wildcenter.org for everything that we have to offer, or wildcenter.org/education for more of our resources available for school groups and otherwise. And then it wouldn't be complete without mentioning the Youth Climate Program. They are a juggernaut. They do so much, and are a really, really great way to tap into thinking about sustainability through the lens of ecosystems, and thinking about how pollinators play a really strong role in that. So they're a great resource to follow at the climate portion of our website, along with their Instagram and even our Instagram with wildcenter.org. So thank you all for joining us. With that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Jeremiah to lead you on a little bit of a project here. I'll make sure to throw things in the chat. If you have any other questions, I'll be around throughout the rest of the program as well. But thank you.
Thank you, Michael. We appreciate all those great resources and that really great perspective of where we were and what we explored at the Wild Center. Thank you so much. Hopefully for all of you who have never had a chance to visit the Wild Center, you get a chance to take a visit this summer, or as things open up more, engage your students with those programs, because really is such a special place in the Adirondacks.
I did forget to note that we've been only open outdoors for the last year or so. We reopened in July last year and have had that outdoor experience that's gone since then. Starting July 1st, we're phased reopening inside. So we'll have a slightly reimagined version of the indoor portion of the Wild Center, focusing on Adirondack rivers first up.
Well, that's very exciting. Thank you so much. I hope you all get a chance to visit again. Thanks, Michael. And with that, Jeremiah will lead us through our first lesson that we'll experience today.
Well, hello. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope you enjoyed the virtual field trip and Michael, his outstanding presentation. It was awesome being next to the bees and hearing them buzz after being locked in winter for so long. So we wanted to just take a look at ecosystems tonight and developing your pollinator gardens. So we sent you a few things in your box. And one of the first things that we looked at is a tarp, and we'll talk about that here shortly. I want to share my screen. So one of the lessons that we have in our lesson matrix is looking at the difference between a managed and natural ecosystem. So we took a look at a blend of things here just recently with the field trip that we just took. And so the first thing we need to do is to define an ecosystem. And an ecosystem is an environment with biotic and abiotic, so living and non-living things. And are you able to see are you still seeing my camera?
No, let me switch your spotlight. Here we go. Sorry, Jeremiah, we're still seeing your PowerPoint. Okay, now we can see your camera.
So the first thing that we need to do is define ecosystems. And when we think of an ecosystem, we think of an environment, but the biotic and abiotic things that we have inside that environment and the interaction. When we think of abiotic, can anybody in chat put a list of things that they might think is an abiotic thing that you would find in the ecosystem, be it the ecosystem that we just walked through or there in your school area? I'm looking for abiotic. Awesome. Yeah. And the other side of that is biotic, and those are the living things, the plants, the animals, and how they interact. So we think of an environment with that water and energy flow, and then also the effect of weather and landscape. And so as we start to look at the hierarchy or the classification, first we start with a biosphere, which would be our globe. They have the biospheres there in Arizona, would be another example. Where it's self-contained. So Earth is a biosphere, and then we start to break into the biomes. So a biome is the general designation, and I know in the elementary and high school and middle school, we look at biomes and the difference of those biomes, and they're really classified broadly through weather and plant and animal, but it's a broad classification. So as we start to break down into ecosystems, we start to look at more familiar areas here in the Adirondacks. I know here in Tupper Lake, they're actually a zone 4 growing area. I live a little south, to the south of the Adirondacks, and we're a zone 3. So our climates are a little bit different just within our park, but our ecosystem can be classified as we're very similar when we start to talk about our forests, as well as our animals and water systems. And then we zoom down into the habitat, and habitat is we're looking at those individual populations. And those populations could be a herd of gazelle on the savanna, or as you saw here, we had honeybees. So when we're looking at that, we're looking at the population or the individual organism, and we're looking at the things that they day-to-day affect them, their habitats, their life through the year, their life cycles. So in the lesson, as you engage in the lesson of managed and natural ecosystems, it really separates these two ecosystems. So a natural is very biodiverse. The systems are usually uninfluenced by humankind. We might have some human influences as we start to engage a little bit and get a little bit into nature, but we're not really seeing those major influences as we would see in an agricultural or a managed system. And there are some similarities. So there are the crossovers. There might be a simple food chain and the managed complex food chain, but both those food chains are reliant on energy and the energy from the sun. So when we talk about simple food chains in a managed agricultural environment, we think about those are things as humans that we put there in place. So we have that system. If we think about an egg farm, you know, we have the chicken, we have the egg, and then that egg then gets processed. At one time in that natural environment, there would have been many more food chains engaged in that natural environment. And you can see here, here's a great picture. Here we have a managed ecosystem in the front and a more natural in the back. And you can even see the natural here with the old warehouse taking over the back side and starting to break down things that we ourselves have put in place. And then to the right, we have the lupines. And you can imagine all of the pollinators, birds, bees, and just the natural snakes and things that you would see in that high grass. Are there any questions? So in the lesson, we just covered the second part of the managed and natural ecosystems, the first and second part of that lesson. And in the lesson, what you would do is once you have given that knowledge to your students, there are 4 different categories. So you have managed ecosystems, natural ecosystems, both in neither. And you would put a sign in each corner and you would give your students different scenarios. So we've developed that with you. So if you could go to Kahoot it. So if you just Google kahoot.it, for those who have not used it, and this would be the pin, we're gonna do that quick little exercise. Oh, very clever. I have a Miss Pollinator. That's exceptional, whoever Pollinator is. I love it. And the sunshine. has a large diversity of plant and animal species. Is it a managed, natural, both managed and natural, or neither managed or natural? And that's correct. It would be natural. As we see the larger biodiversity, those are natural habitats. Animal and plant species are selected by humans. And that would be managed. The picture we saw a beef farm, and those beef were selected to be in that habitat, and that habitat was changed for the beef. Animals and plant species are limited by humans. So again, it was managed. So we're managing those species, tree species, plant species. Ooh, pollinator. There's a reason, at the top of the list. Living things interact with non-living things. Living things interact with non-living things. Yes, that's both managed and natural. And Elizabeth is making a run. The Louvre in Paris, France is the world's largest art museum. So trick question, it's neither managed or natural. When you think about that ecosystem, there really aren't those food webs or things like that. It's a very trick question because you think there are organisms there. So we're talking about the rainforest. It has 16,000 species of trees and the most diverse. So natural is correct. When we're talking about large biodiversity, we're talking about those natural ecosystems. Animal and plant species are selected by humans. Those are managed because, again, humans are selecting them, so we are managing those species. KR is on fire. She's come, or he is coming back with vengeance. Fertilizers and nutrients are added to the soil. That is a managed because we're adding to the soil, so we're amending that soil. A biological community. There's a little hint in that picture. Both managed and natural. So we have biological life in both managed and natural ecosystems. And our last question. The Mall of America in Bloomington, Minnesota is the largest shopping mall in the US. Neither managed or natural. That's an ecosystem there with very little biodiversity. We're not trying to manage any biodiversity or bio life. So great job, KR. Any questions about that experience? So if we were in the classroom, again, we would have those signs in the corner. And after discussing the difference between a managed and a natural ecosystem, we would give those, we give students a chance to decide on their own. It's great to see that kind of peer pressure sometimes, because you know that one kid who wants to head to that one right answer, but goes with everybody else. And it's a great opportunity. So those files are in our lesson on our matrix. So thank you so much for participating with that. So tips with starting a pollinator garden. We sent y'all some seeds as part of the Adirondack pollinator experience. And in this, you should have had 30 packets. You also received a pamphlet that kind of helps you understand the importance of pollinators. And it gives some tips, and we'll go and kind of look at some of these tips in a little more detail. So that's for you for reference as teachers. Now, as you're starting to think about developing your garden, the first thing is you really need to locate your space. So for us in the classroom, in the garden that we developed, you can see that these are our raised garden beds. We decided to use mulch to keep down weed suppression as a best practice, but then we also had some natural habitat here on the back side. You can see some milkweed trees in the back. As Leah discussed, that's very important for pollinators. It's a place for them to hide out. When we're thinking of hummingbirds, they nest in trees. Mason bees only fly a few hundred yards from where they're pollinating, where their food source is, and we want their food source to be our garden. So if you look along the bottom edge here, we also incorporated a pollinator garden, a 3,000 square foot pollinator garden around our beds, because we want that heavy pollinator influence. So one of the things you need to first think about is your site. You need to think of your sunlight for the plants that you're going to grow. You also need to think about that soil. It doesn't need to be amended. When we're thinking about pollinators or natural pollinator plants, a lot of times they can handle very adverse soils. So as far as soil amendment, that's not as important. What is important is that you do need to clear your soil. And that's why we sent you a tarp. So one of the regenerative practices that we talk about with our students, and that you can talk about with your students, is that there is the system of no-till, or not breaking up the top layer. Part of that is because as you break that up, you're breaking up all those bacterial levels. There's a soil ecosystem in itself. And so you're breaking that up, but you're also causing a chance for erosion and for that soil to dry out. So there's one way that we want to share with you, and that's what you would use your tarp for, is occultation. So occultation, if you looked at your tarp, we sent you a tarp that is black. And so all this is you would lay this on the area that you would want to pollinate, and you're going to let that sit on top for 3-4 weeks. The longer, the better. And occultation is just starving the light from your plants. So this is a great experiment with your students at the elementary, high school, middle school level. When you talk about the needs of plants, mark out, I think we gave you a 6x8 tarp, which is 42 square feet. There's another lesson when we're talking about area. So 42 square feet, mark that out with a piece of string on some stakes, and then tarp 42 square feet with your tarp, and that will have your control. And also you would then talk about the needs of plants, and when plants need soil, well, we talked about that in our aeroponics. We can grow that with water, but most of the time we're talking about planting in soil. They need oxygen, they need space, and they need light. And so when we start to starve that light, we start to kill those plants. What's great about occultation is that we're not heating that soil up to an extreme level. So what happens is you start to invite your decomposers, and the decomposers will start to work into that soil, start to aerate that soil and eat some of that decomposed plant matter, pulling those nutrients back into the soil. The other option you have is solarization. And you can see here, I have some clear plastic, and it's a great comparison when we're talking about things like greenhouse gases effects. Solarization, you're really going to ramp the heat up. I looked at my soil today with occultation, and I was at 105 degrees. As I add this clear plastic, I'm going to raise that temperature much higher. And one of the concerns is that you start to break that soil biodiversity. So here's an example of a site that we used occultation on. So you can see in the back, we let it go to weed specifically for this professional development. And I'm going to fib and tell you that was the case. Really what we are doing is we're recovering the site. And you can see we use about 8 inches. And this is what it looks like underneath the tarp after using occultation. You can see that we rake this out. The soil is moist. The weeds are pretty much dead. And so when we're looking to start our pollinator garden, if we allow our site to be tarped over for 3-4 weeks, then we rake it off. We don't really want to break that top soil level. We come in with our students and we plant our wildflower seeds. When you plant those seeds, you just want to walk on them just a little bit. You don't want to bury them underneath the soil. They need to make good soil contact, and then you want to water over if we don't have a lot of rain. Sometimes you can add hay, but a lot of these seeds prefer direct sunlight. And just this morning, I wanted to share this. You can see one of the pollinators that we were been talking about are mason bees, and we'll talk about those a little later. But you can see their pollen pouches. And when we talk about native bees, we're really talking about honeybees, sweat bees, and bees other than honeybees. So they're non-social bees. And looking one last time around that site that we are looking at, we have our lilac bushes, which these were covered with mason bees today, but we also have maple trees, and maple trees are great early food for a lot of our pollinators. And finally, as we're thinking about pollinators, beetles and moths are also great pollinators. And so when we start to think about our garden and developing gardens with pollinator gardens near them, we can start to think about other types of species. So when we look at some regenerative practices or best practices in agriculture, we look at some of the cultural things, so things like doing wood chips and keeping our plants healthy, but some of the biological things that we can do within our garden ecosystem or managed ecosystem. One of the great, couple of the great pollinators that are very powerful are ladybugs and lacewings, because they're carnivorous and they'll take out a lot of the mites and things that we would see as pests. When we look at some of these biological processes, we can start to avoid some of the pesticide controls. So there's a lot of research being done when we're talking about pollinator habitats. When we're thinking about agriculture, is how to develop agriculture in a way that we are able to avoid some of those pesticide issues, which leads into talking about monarchs, which we will be doing here shortly. So are there any questions? I know I talked a whole lot, and well, awesome. Feel free to, I'll share this PowerPoint out when we share out our evaluation. So with the seeds, we hope your students enjoy them. One of the things I might think about doing is tarping off a section this summer, and maybe will the tarp get rid of stubborn myrtle? If you leave it on there, it'll get rid of almost anything. So cut it back and get it to soil surface. The closer you get that tarp to the soil surface, the quicker that will happen. What I might think about doing is tarping off a section until the frost, when we first get our first hard frost, and then putting your pollinator seeds out after that first frost. These seeds are native to the Northeast. And so what you're doing is you're duplicating that process with your students. Our native plants will be dropping their seeds in the fall. They will go dormant through the frost. And they'll be some of the first plants to wake up because you've really killed off that 6x8 section or 48. Did I say 42 earlier? Work on my math tables, Katie. I will.
And Carrie wanted to know if can it work to have a pollinator garden in a courtyard?
It can work to have a pollinator garden in the courtyard. One of the things that we really loved about gardening with our students, and having left the classroom last July, so being first part of the pandemic, going virtual with everybody else, a lot of anxiety, and as you all know, there are a lot of mental health of our students and ourselves as teachers. I mean, there's a lot of stress being put on first responders, and especially our teachers. You all are definitely special, and there's nothing like having a beautiful pollinator garden to put yourself or your students in front of. So first off, mental health is phenomenal. There's a lot of neuroscience about smells and colors, and the positive approach of plants. So there's a lot of benefit to having that in a courtyard. So yes, excellent question.
Well, thank you so much, Jeremiah. So what we're going to do now is show you where you can find these excellent resources before we move into our next piece. So I'm going to share my screen with everyone. One of the greatest tools that we have in New York Agriculture in the classroom is our National Curriculum Matrix. This is an online searchable database of the best lessons from across the country. So if you head to our website, after the beautiful rotating photos, you're going to find this blue box. And in here, it's right on our homepage, so it's always easy to find. It's keyword searchable. So if I'm looking for information about pollinators, you can see a bunch of great lessons come up. So we are going to be able to click on any of these great lessons, and you can search just bees, or you can search just butterflies, or you could search for plant parts, for photosynthesis, and there's over 500 lessons on this tool. So what the beautiful thing is, every single lesson looks exactly the same. It has all the elements that you as an educator are going to need for integration into your classroom. So along with a quick purpose, the materials that you're going to need. I also love that if this lesson talks about a PowerPoint, or it talks about a handout or another tool that you might need, everything is going to be linked for you in the essential files. You don't need to create anything additional to go with these lessons. So some great vocab that's based on the scaled for the grade level of this lesson. And then what I also love is you may not feel like an expert in pollinators, or maybe you don't feel like an expert in compost, but every one of these lessons gives enough background agriculture connections to help you feel confident teaching this topic with your students. So we really love that it has this very in-depth, just enough to make you dangerous and want a little bit more background information. Then we, of course, move in through all of our procedures. There's usually photos that help you with models. And then if we pop right down here, every single lesson is already aligned to the Common Core Learning Standards. So if your administrator pops in and wants to know what in the world is happening, you can show them how it really does fit. And as lessons are being added and to the matrix, they are Next Gen Science Standards aligned, and they're going back and updating our lessons already in the matrix to Next Gen. So you'll see a lot of that pepper throughout many of our lessons. The other great tool here is the suggested companion resources. So it could have 2 or it could have 20 here. And it's kind of like Amazon. If you like this lesson about pollinators, here are some tools that might help you, because along with those 500 lessons, there's close to 800 companion resources that are in this matrix and always being added. So it's a pretty exceptional tool. You can bring your search just to your grade level or the type of resource that you're looking for, and hopefully you'll find some really great tools and resources to help you bring these topics to your classroom. And while we're here on the website, I just wanted to show you a couple other options for connection with your students and for development of yourself. So we do have some virtual field trips that are happening right now that you can still register for. We have our Cow to Cone virtual field trip series. So we have one tomorrow and then 2 more after that on Tuesdays as we get to the end of our school year. So this is all about dairy farming, and we're basing these out of Old McDonald's farm in Sackus Harbor. So that's been really fun. Additionally, we have a beef field trip that's happening tomorrow, and there's a lot of environmental conservation topics that will be covered, so you can definitely still register for that. And then finally, we have a pollinators, what's all the buzz? So we'll visit an apiary and see all the different things that they do based out of Oxford, New York. So there's another great virtual field trip. Those are for your students to engage in. I will also let you know that for educator workshops, we're here today on our Pollinator PD, but we do have a summer STEM experience, and this is all about beef. So if you are interested in a little more of what we're doing, this is a multi-day experience. You'll get dollars to purchase beef through the experience. We have some competition aspects that are part of this, but really understanding all the steps, the life cycle of beef, if that's something you feel like you don't know about but want to know more of, including environmental conservation, food science, connecting with a chef, all those elements will be covered. So along with tools and resources and lessons to implement with your classroom for this next school year. So the registrations for that are open now. We'd love for you to sign up. My last thing that I'm going to tell you about before I bring you back to Jeremiah and our shameless plugs here is that if you really want to round out your year of professional development, I highly encourage you to apply for our National Agriculture in the Classroom Scholarship. This is for a virtual experience. Applications are due on June 1. And this will give you access to one of the best professional development conferences for educators that I've ever experienced. And the teachers who've gone to this before really speak only highly of the workshops because they're usually taught by teachers or by Ag in the Classroom folks from the different states. So you get a chance to really understand and hear from teachers about how they're implementing these tools and resources to make their student experience better, more authentic, and there's a lot of inspiration that goes along with it. So we are giving out a lot of these scholarships. You get the virtual conference access, full access, and then you also get special experiences and tools from New York Ag in the Classroom that we want to help invest in you. So those are due June 1. We'd love to have you join us. Any questions or thoughts? All right, with that, we'll give you back to Jeremiah.
Well, thank you. And I wanted to introduce Miss Angie Babbitt from Monarch Watch, 2 of the organizations that I participated with as a teacher myself in the classroom is Wild Center. They're an exceptional program, but also project Monarch Watch, which is a project out of Kansas University focused on life cycles and education on monarchs. And there's definitely a super unique migration that monarchs make that no other pollinators and very few animals in this world make. So Angie, thank you so much for being with us.
Just wanted to get a quick idea of the age range of students that the teachers that are here today have. Is it pretty broad?
It is broad. So
okay.
I think we go all the way from early elementary to high school.
Okay, so a lot of the stuff that I'm covering will be geared towards one or the other of those. Obviously, the teachers will want to decide which parts of these things I'm talking about will apply to them, but certainly there is a wide range of information out there for teachers of all different age levels. And I'm hoping to maybe get you some ideas about things that you can work on. I think my connection is a little bit bad, and I just need a nod from someone that you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm going to turn off my video so that I don't have to worry about that being a part of my issue. So I'm going to share my screen now, and my personal video so that you guys don't. I do that now that I've stop video. There we go. Okay, so as he mentioned, I am at the University of Kansas. Monarch Watch is an organization that focuses mostly on the monarch butterfly, but we also do a lot of other pollinator type conservation. And I'm going to be talking primarily about butterflies, but it can be related to anything that is within the environment of the monarch butterfly. And because the monarch flies such a long distance from Canada all the way to Mexico, that covers a lot of area. So we're talking about an
Angie,
Hello?
I'm so sorry, but we are not seeing your screen. Would you be willing to stop sharing and then maybe try
You're
again?
not seeing my screen? Sure. Try it again. Okay, can you see it now?
No, unfortunately, I'm not seeing it now, but I do have your slides if you'd like me to move through them for you.
Let me just try one more time.
Sure.
And then if that doesn't work, then we will go ahead and, are you not seeing anything? Is it just blank?
No, it's saying that you're trying to share your screen, or it says your screen sharing. But
that's awesome. Why don't you go ahead and try it then? I
okay.
think that'll probably be the best. So I'm glad I went ahead and sent those to you. Your computer connection is obviously much faster than mine. I could tell when you were going through my stuff. You were whizzing right through. So.
All right, so we are sharing now.
Yeah, just go ahead and go to the second slide there.
Okay. All right.
Okay, are you guys, are we ready now?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to cover citizen science. Monarch citizen science is a pretty specialized thing. And there are more groups than just Monarch Watch that are doing citizen science. And I'm going to let you guys in on some of that. We are also sponsoring free milkweeds for school gardens. So those of you who are interested in adding milkweed to your garden can participate in that program. I very rarely turn down a school for free milkweed applications. I have one that I turned down this year, and it was because it was a student who applied, and she stopped corresponding with me after I asked her for some follow-up stuff. And I just can't give a student garden supplies if they don't have permission from their their school to do so. So I needed that.
We may have lost Angie. So sorry, everyone. We'll give her just another moment to connect. But Jeremiah, maybe while we're waiting for Angie, you can share some of your experience with Monarch Watch.
Yep. So for my students, this is a great project to really start with your students because it kicks off, Monarch season kicks off in September. And that's when we start to see that flight. I'm sure Angie will talk about 4 generations. So there are 4 generations of monarchs every year. The first generation is that generation that's coming up from Mexico, which is their native wintering grounds. They come up into lower Texas and northern Mexico. And really they're following that blossom and blooms of the flowers. And so then they head up. Eventually their 4th generation is here. And I think we might have Angie back. Angie, are you with us?
I am here. I am so sorry. I don't know what's going on with my connection. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And that is the founder of Dr. Chip Taylor is the founder of Monarch Watch. He founded Monarch Watch in 1992 with the intention of learning more about monarchs through the tagging program that had begun a long time ago. Go ahead and go to the next slide. There's a picture of Dr. Fred Urquhart that was taken by the National Geographic magazine. You can find this online. You can also find the photograph of Catalina Trail, who was on the cover of that National Geographic magazine. He began tagging in 1940, and that program tapered off in the 90s, and Dr. Taylor took up tagging monarchs. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And as you can see, there is a tag on the monarch that this girl is releasing. Kids of all ages, except tiny toddlers that can't really control their motor skills, can handle monarchs. They probably would need help with tagging them. Monarchs are super sturdy, and as long as someone teaches a kid how to hold them properly, they are fairly difficult to harm. A lot of people are worried about that. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And they have a specific code. Gosh, I think I might be losing my connection again. And you could actually see that tag on that butterfly that's flying up to the right part of the screen there. It is going to have a very distinct code on it, and we can track that code. Go ahead to the next slide. This particular one was found on a living butterfly in Mexico. It had not quite made it all the way to the overwintering sites, but someone photographed it, and we were able to get back with the person who tagged it and let them know that their butterfly was alive and well and in Mexico, and it had been tagged in Ontario. So that was a trip, a straight line trip of 1,600 miles. Of course, the butterfly did not travel straight when it was flying. So we don't really know how far it traveled, but it was more than that. One of the things that's really great about this program, go ahead to the next slide, is that it is contributing to monarch science. So Dr. Taylor is in the middle of writing manuscripts based on over 20 years of tagging data, and kids such as those you saw in those pictures are contributing to that science. And these are just 2 papers that he's written recently that are looking at different aspects of monarch biology, more than just where did they start and where did they end up. So go ahead and go to the next slide. This slide describes a lot of the different citizen science that's going on in North America related to monarch butterflies. Of course, there's the Monarch Watch tagging program, and we also have a lesser known calendar project that people can participate in. But other organizations have lots of different opportunities for this, and there is a flyer you can print out through Monarch Joint Venture. And if you are not familiar with Monarch Joint Venture and you want to be involved in monarch butterflies, you need to become familiar with the resources on their website. It's a joint venture in that there are a lot of organizations that participate in Monarch Joint Venture, and all of them are capable of reviewing anything that Monarch Joint Venture puts out. So we know that it's been heavily vetted for accuracy, and it is scientifically valid. So we support the information that is on their website, and they have a lot of Monarch Watches information on there as well. Go ahead. Monarch Watch is giving away free milkweeds, as I mentioned, and I've just got a few slides here of, you can just go through these one at a time, and we just pause for just a second, just, just show you how kids are participating in doing these activities in their schoolyards and interacting with the plants, interacting with the soil, interacting with monarchs. And they're also planting monarch waste stations on their school property. And we have a monarch waste station program that schools can participate in. It's about $16 to register a waste station. And you can also get the sign that's in the background on that page there. Go ahead. There's this was just a slide. The next slide was just to help me remember to talk about that. So monarch waste stations are made up of two different main aspects. Go ahead and go to that next slide. This slide was built for the Midwest, so it's got some plants on it that you may not see for sale in your area, but specifically the whorled milkweed that's on the right side there. But basically, milkweed is needed for the adult females to lay their eggs on. And then nectar sources are needed for the adult butterflies to get energy for reproductive activities and for migration and other flight. So those are the two main aspects of a monarch waste station. There's no limit to the size of a monarch waste station. It can be as small or as big as it can be with those two aspects. We have a lot of resources online. Go ahead to that next slide there. But there are other organizations that also have really great lists for planting. And these are some things that hopefully you'll be able to write down later. Go ahead and go to that next one. This particular list is one of my favorites. It's produced by Monarch Watch. It's a little bit hard to find. So when you go back and look for it, it's that website underneath Butterfly Garden Plant List. That's where you're going to want, where it says monarchwatch.org/garden. That is where you're going to want to go for this. And why I like this is that it has other butterfly host plant species on it. So you can feed more than just monarch butterflies. You can feed painted ladies, American variegated fritillaries, Baltimore checker spots. If they're in your area, you can plant the plants that belong in your area to attract those females for egg laying. If we don't have milkweed, we don't have monarchs. If we don't have pawpaw trees, we don't have zebra swallowtails. So there are a lot of different plant and butterfly interactions that are important for people to understand. And I don't think people really do fully get that. We have to have these plants in order for these butterflies to be on the earth. There's also over here on the far right side, you can see on that, there are check marks that show you what regions of the United States, and there's a key also on another page that you can see. So I'm in the Midwest, so I would want to look at the MW column, and you're in the Northeast, so you'd want to look at NE. On the far left, it tells you whether or not it's native, perennial, annual, biennial, if it's a butterfly attractor or butterfly host plant. Or a hummingbird plant. So those are what those different columns mean. Okay, go ahead and we're going to talk about the migration now. And if you could circle that corn belt area with your mouse, that would be great. So that corn belt area right there, that's where I am. And that's where the majority of monarch butterflies are reproductive in the summer, that feed those the milkweeds and that area feed those butterflies so that they can get down to Mexico. You also have butterflies in New York that are making it all the way to the overwintering sites, but the majority of them are coming from that corn belt. And so this is an aspect of agriculture that automatically just fits right in with how our land use is interacting with the wildlife that we have in our areas. And everyone in the United States is benefiting from the corn and soy that's being created in that corn belt. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Chip Taylor last year wrote a blog that broke the monarch migration into 4 parts. I'm not going to go into great detail about it, but I gave you some summary here. The first of that migration is actually the last part of the last migration. So we're talking about the butterflies that are in the overwintering sites that have been there all winter long, moving up into the Texas and Oklahoma range where they're going to be seeking out milkweeds. You can advance to the next slide. So at the end of May, those monarchs are dead, but they have laid eggs. And that second migration after the Mexican monarchs have died is this second migration. So that generation is going to be busy making lots of the eggs and babies. And by early June, the directional flight of these butterflies is over and done with, and the recolonization of North America is complete. So we're talking about these butterflies reaching all the way up into their northernmost areas, as far north as Manitoba, Canada. And then there's a 6-week interval where there isn't any directional flight, and all the reproduction of monarchs is just in your area. So in that time, that's when you're going to be seeing monarchs just doing their thing, flying around, and you're going to be wanting to provide them with both nectar sources and milkweed. Go ahead. The third migration is kind of a one that not all of them participate in. We see some southwesternly directional flight for some, but not all monarchs. And I think this is probably more heavily noticed in the upper Midwest. They're heading towards Georgia and Texas. And by the 3rd week of August, that migration is over. Sometimes it's referred to as the pre-migration migration. So go to the next slide. And this is the one that everyone, that monarchs are famous for. This is the first part of the one that I talked about first. So these butterflies are flying from as far north as Winnipeg, and then they by latitude start their migration, moving south, and eventually hopefully make their way to the volcanic region of Mexico. So this next slide is telling you a little bit more about how that latitudinal beginnings is sort of like, so here I am in Kansas, and my migration doesn't start until later. Your migration in New York is going to be starting a little bit sooner. So if you go to the next slide, the timing of that is sort of laid out. And so we use this chart to demonstrate when tagging is the best, most accurately going to be capturing some of those migrating butterflies. For me, I'm going to be looking at tagging near that 39-degree latitude, but you guys are going to be tagging sooner. Go ahead, and that slide is, you can skip that one, we've already seen it. This is a map, a close-up map of what Journey North produces. These maps are really interesting because not only do scientists use it, but when people call me and ask, so when are the butterflies going to show up in my area? I can just say, hey, go look at Journey North, zoom in on your area, and you can find out what butterflies are doing. And not only that, you can see photographs of those butterflies. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is a photograph of a fall roost in Elbow Lake, Minnesota. And actually the reason I focused on this was because there was an event that happened in Fargo, North Dakota, where some aerial spray had actually been sprayed right after this roost site was seen. And go to the next one. Not far from there was this roost site as well. And a lot of people in the Fargo, Moorhead, Minnesota area, we're seeing dead butterflies. And so I was giving a presentation about the timing of aerial sprays for mosquitoes and showed them these images. It's really important to keep in mind that this all of these things are connected, and we just need to really be careful about, even if we think that the mosquitoes are maybe going to cause us a lot of issues, we need to think about, what time these other insects in the environment are also out and about. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This is an aerial photograph, and I think I have another one later in my slide of the overwintering sites in Mexico. And you can see where the trees are kind of rust colored there. Those are butterflies that are covering the trees in Mexico in those forests. So when they're in the overwintering sites, the trees are very important ecologically because they buffer the butterflies from major changes in weather patterns. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Monarchs, as I mentioned, are obligatory milkweed consumers. Go ahead. And the milkweeds that they consume are the toxins within those plants are built up in the monarch butterflies' bodies, and they become toxic. So go to the next slide. When I was growing up in the 80s, we used to actually see this photograph in our science textbooks. Dr. Lincoln Brower, who died just a couple of years ago, took this photograph of a blue jay. He had tethered to a bar there and fed it a monarch butterfly, and the response of the blue jay is in the next slide. I think it's about 20 minutes later, that blue jay vomited. So this is a demonstration of how these monarchs are actually protecting the entire species, every individual that is sacrificed through some kind of predatory behavior by an animal. That animal learns to recognize the pattern of the monarch butterfly and avoid eating one in the future. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So an important fact about monarchs when they are on that migratory route is that they are non-reproductive. And the reason they are non-reproductive is because reproduction is very expensive. And so if you think about plants and animals only have a certain amount of energy that they can expend. And animals that are cold-blooded or ectothermic, that is limited by the amount of energy that they can consume and also temperature. So if the temperature is high, then they're going to be using more energy. If the temperature is low, they're going to be using less energy. Those monarchs that are flying to Mexico are conserving energy in two different ways. They're conserving it by becoming non-reproductive. They actually are juvenile. They haven't yet developed their reproductive organs. And they're also conserving energy by moving to Mexico to maintain a body temperature around 40 degrees. They're staying above freezing, but below a threshold that makes their metabolism too high, and their lifespan, therefore, is lengthened. So those butterflies that are in that one phase of that 4-part pattern, those butterflies that are reproductive in the summer are only going to live 2 to 6 weeks. This photograph was taken because there was a snowstorm in Sierra Chincua in March of 2016 that killed a lot of the monarch butterflies that were about ready to move north. March is kind of at the tail end of their movement north, and so it didn't catch all of them. But unfortunately, that particular event also led to a lot of logging because a lot of the trees had fallen. And so there are some interactions between the people of Mexico and the butterflies that are really important. Go ahead and go to the next slide. As I mentioned, butterflies need nectar sources, and one of the really interesting things is a lot of the nectar sources that they use are also host plants for other butterflies, and that is just a win-win situation when you can find host plants for other butterflies that are also good nectar sources. Go ahead. So the Fish and Wildlife Service was put to the task of making a decision about whether or not the monarch butterfly should be listed on the endangered species list. A lot of people like to refer to the monarch butterfly as endangered. It isn't actually on the endangered species list. It is being reviewed every year now until it is no longer considered a candidate. I would like to request that teachers not refer to species as endangered if they're not actually on the endangered species list, because it is an actual legal term. But I understand that a lot of people feel very strongly that something that is in danger should be considered endangered. But I think you can probably find other terms like species of concern, or you know, one of the things that we like to talk about with a monarch butterfly is that it's not actually the species itself that's endangered, but their miraculous and very poorly understood life cycle and their journey of their migration. That's really what we're most concerned about. There are populations of monarchs that are probably not going to go away, and an endangered or extinct species is one that is either in endangered species means it will go extinct soon if we don't do something, and that's not a concern of ours. Go ahead and go to the next slide, and you can just go through these next two slides. We're just going to see an overview here of that population trend. That's in the eastern part of the United States, and the next one is the western population. The western population really crashed last year, and so there's a lot of concern about those overwintering sites in California. Geographically, we can look at larger scale impacts on the monarch population. You have this strip of land through the center part of the United States, which was the tallgrass prairie ecosystem, which is where I live, and it is also the most endangered ecosystem on the planet. It also does a really, really good job of sequestering carbon to keep excess greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. And so we have a lot of different effects of monarchs that are occurring in the environment, and they all kind of come together to help increase destabilization of global climate. And I'm not going to go through those specifically. Go ahead and go to the next slide. One of the things that we can do, though, is we can look at the different interactions between the things that people do on the planet and how that impacts a single species, such as the monarch butterfly. So one of the things that I like to talk about is the impacts of agriculture on global climate and transportation on global climate, and all of those things are actually intertwined with one another. Go ahead and go down to the slide with the cows on it. So the majority of the corn and soy that's produced in that area that's really important for monarch butterflies is going towards livestock production, ethanol, and biodiesel. Most of the corn and soy is not going to food products. So those are really minor uses. Go ahead and go down to the buffalo picture there. So, you know, I think that it's really important to ask your students, and no matter what age they are, like how do you fit into this big picture? And you know, by planting, go ahead and go to the next slide. By planting things that are sequestering carbon rather than turf grass and lawn grass, we're planting gardens in our in our schoolyards that are actually, they're deep root systems, and they have the ability to help our planet. And then also just flip through those next few slides, because those are all Mexico. And I just want to kind of give you an idea of what Mexico looks like, where these overwintering sites are. Go ahead and go through those until we're out of time. There's a tree production. Avocados are also grown in Mexico, and some of them are being grown in the overwintering sites, and illegal logging is happening. This is Angangueo. It's one of the cities that's in that area, and I was able to visit and take this picture. It's a beautiful community. And the monarchs actually support them because the tourists come there. So if you guys have any questions, I am available for answering them. And you can also email me. You can share my information if needed.
Well, Angie, thank you so much. I know as a teacher and as an educator, for me and my students participating in this project was phenomenal. I was mentioning when we first got cut off is that it really is a program that kicks off in September. So for us, and thinking about geography and just following the migration, it's just such a phenomenal experience to personalized geography and that migration of the monarchs, as well as so many other valuable science concepts and math, and we're talking about distances and things like that. So for those teachers out there, it's a great program to engage with. I think the stickers are a minimal cost, and those, I believe those costs go to support the Monarch Watch and to fund them and some of the things that they're doing.
Yeah, so the stickers, whenever one is recovered in Mexico, the person who recovers that sticker gets $5 for every one sticker that they recover, which is enough money to fund their food for a week in Mexico. It goes a long way. So we're helping the economy of the people there in Mexico by supporting that program.
And I know for my students, we talked about philanthropy and that importance, and how we can give back, being all the way from New York. We were always in hopes. We sent hundreds of butterflies south. Nothing was recovered, so we're crossing our fingers, but I think those stickers might have been lost because that was a couple years ago. So
yeah. So the importance of supporting those communities is that it actually helps prevent illegal logging. So anybody who's an economist can figure out pretty quickly that if you're impoverished and you need an income of some sort, one of the best ways to do it in that area is to utilize the resources around you. And the best resource they have, the most valuable one, is the trees. So that happens to also be the most valuable resource to the monarch butterflies. So by supporting them, we're also helping save those forests.
And then on a final note, I do want to mention that there is a scholarship in a program through one of the world organizations that as a teacher you can try to engage with, that will allow you to get down to Mexico and check out those overwintering grounds. So Angie, thank you so much. I know it's fascinating, and we definitely appreciate your time.
You're welcome. And I'm going to stick around for just a second. I'm going to see if I can find some links to put in the chat, but I won't interrupt you.
Oh no, thank you. Thank you so much. It was a privilege. Well, we're going to take a look at, we have about 5 minutes, and some of the things that we sent to you. So one of the things that I want to point out is that inside the pamphlet we sent to you, we have a long list of all the seeds that were that are in this packet. And if you notice right here at 5%, we have butterfly milkweed. So it's a great opportunity, just speaking with Angie, to be able to get some milkweed in your garden, and then definitely reach out to Project Monarch Watch, and they would be happy to support you. So when we're talking about pollinators, we did send you some resources to help you develop that pollinator habitat. We looked at the things that you would need, how to start to develop a food source, but we also need to think about things like overwintering. Here in the Adirondacks, we actually have a winter firefly, which is pretty incredible. Fireflies are one of those parasitic bugs that are also feast on nectar and pollen, and they actually don't grow, but they overwinter in things like leaves and cracks. So we sent you 3 cans. The importance of these 3 cans is, as we're developing that habitat, we're thinking about with our students in engineering, things that we can upcycle or utilize for another source. So one of the challenges you want to put out to your students is first do that investigation piece of the natural and managed habitat, and then start to look at the different types of pollinators. Here we sent you a bunch of straws, paper straws, and this is what mason bees and leaf cutter and sweat bees, which are powerhouse pollinators. And actually, there's some science that they are one of the most efficient pollinators because their inefficiency of landing on a flower. They just kind of dive into the flower, cover themselves with pollen, and then fly to another flower. So one of the cans you can start to develop as a habitat for your mason bees. This can also be filled with sticks and twigs and other things like that, because they will make their homes in those sticks. But if you look at things like cattails and reed plants, those can easily be cut and they can be put in. And what happens is solitary bees don't live in hives. And so what they'll do is they will fill this whole cylinder with their larvae, and they'll cap it off with clay and mud. So it's important to have a water source in your habitat and some clay also. For moths are also a power pollinator. So we sent you a bunch of leaves. Luna moths are incredible. If you've ever seen those, they're humongous. They're amazing. They're not pollinators, but they make great bat food, which are pollinators, and bird food, which help you to maintain that garden. So if you take one of your cans and you can fill your cans with leaves. We also sent you wood chips. When we talk about wood chips, things like ladybugs and our beetles like to hide in those wood chips. So as you start to recover some of those objects, Coke bottles, old cans, you can fill these and help to create an overwinter spot near your garden and pollinator habitat. You have a food source, you'll also have a home for that habitat. And finally, with the drill bit, very similar to the pollinator, to the straws, is with the drill bit. Pollinators and mason bees and other beetles love these holes. A lot of pollinators don't make holes in trees on their own, and so they look for things like sapsuckers, which are a type of bird that will make little holes in trees, and they'll start to fill these holes, very much like our straws. So it's very simple. I like to cut it on a bias. You can kind of see this is a stump that's been cut off from a log that has been used in logging, and it kind of sits up, and you can set it right on the ground. You can also do full logs, and you can stack these like you would a wood pile. There is a lot of interest in pollinator hotels. But some of the science is that you want to spread these things out. You don't want your pollinators on top of each other. You want to kind of spread that habitat out. Would it be harmful? Not necessarily, but it is, when we go back to the slide of pest management, it is a best practice to kind of get your habitats diverse and spread around your garden. Is there anybody who has any questions? Well, great. I appreciate you coming to the Wild Center tonight. I know Katie is going to give you a little more information before we head out for the evening. Thank you for joining us under professional development, and we look forward to seeing y'all in the fall.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure spending time with you. Wonderful questions tonight. And we just wanted to follow up with a little more information. So if you would like your CTLE credits and certificate for attending this session, it would be in the value of 2 hours. You do need to fill out the evaluation on the second page of the evaluation. You'll put in some information from the Teach website that's just thing. You don't need to log into your Teach profile, just information so that it will all connect and accept the certificate when you go to upload it. So be sure to fill out that evaluation. And we so much appreciate your feedback on making these sessions better and more exciting for you. And again, don't hesitate to sign up for any of our upcoming programs for the summer. And we just enjoy spending time with you. If Jeremiah and I will stick around if you have any last minute questions or things that you want to talk through. But otherwise, have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
And Michael will be here too if you want to ask any questions of the Wild Center.
There was a question, Jeremiah. Where do you place the tin cans?
So you can use different things. One of the things that we like to do is take a screw and you can put this right on a post. You can always tie rope on it and hang it in the trees. The other thing is when you're talking about things with beetles and moths, they like to overwinter in wood chips and leaves. So you can put those things, just set them on the ground and stack a few to give you a few different options, and then let them do their thing and overwinter. What's really cool is once you put them out, to have your students go check and find out what's in there. Any other questions? I do want to mention for those in the Adirondacks, I know we have, and I apologize, we didn't mention this, some Adirondack schools. And if you're living inside the park, in your school inside the park, you're able to apply for their Pollinator Garden Grant. And if you're accepted, the Adirondack Action will provide you with a pollinator garden. I think it comes with 3 raised beds, and they provide you with all the plants. So that's another great opportunity. So you can, it's right on the packet, and you can go to their website. I work with an organization down in Old Forge, our organization there, and they just received one this year. But it is open to personal individuals. It's also open to organizations as well. So for those Adirondack schools like Tupper and Placid, I think we have Plattsburgh on. Definitely check that out. And they bring their trailer to you too. It's really cool. It's a pretty phenomenal program. And definitely come here and bring your kids to the Wild Center. It's, if you haven't been, it's incredible. Right, Michael?
Yep. I forgot to mention, we do tag monarchs in the late summer. We have, I can throw in a website that we created to try to get a lot of things compiled in digital, but we do, we have the Monarch way station that Leah walked by, and then we also will tag monarchs just outside in the outdoor classroom and have setups where you can watch them as caterpillars on throughout their metamorphosis and just spot the caterpillar around campus.
And if you want help with Project Monarch and you're interested in doing it with your students, please reach out to me. We participated for 4 or 5 years. But what's really cool is when you sex them, in the way that you tell that they're different, the different sexes, wing shape, but the males have a little dot where the females don't. And that's always fascinating to students. And that's part of the information that they gather for the Project Monarch.
Well, Michael, I'll put a plug in. We're hosting the National Agriculture in the Classroom Conference in Saratoga next June. So I'll be sure to send you along the workshop proposals if you'd be interested in submitting. We'd love to have you. You're right up our alley of hands-on experiential learning. We'd love to have you there.
It'd be awesome. A little catalyst to get me actually get my act together with a true pollinator program in our suite of activities.
Oh, well, all the things you do are wonderful.
Put it together.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And special thanks to you, Michael, and your whole team. They were wonderful. All right. Well, we'll all see you all later. Bye-bye.
And congratulations. Enjoy your summer. It's well earned. So well earned.
Yes.
Kudos to you. Well done, teachers.